Okay, let me try again. Okay.
I'm
So sorry. I'm not sure what happened there.
No, neither.
Okay, I'm just gonna ask the question again if you don't mind.
No, cool.
So the question that I had was, we know that. So sorry about that.
No problem.
So we know that mental health doesn't only affect the person that is dealing with the mental illness, but it can also affect the people surrounding them, and especially people that are trying to help. But I think you find that someone is suffering from a mental illness and you don't know how to support them, but you still want to be there for them. But you often neglect yourself in the name of help. But I want to highlight, or want you guys to highlight, how it also affects the people surrounding them and how it affects them. So that question goes out to both of you.
Okay. Look, we very often refer to something as like caregiver burnout, where you have like family members dealing with somebody suffering with a mental illness. They report they're absolutely exhausted. They can't cope. The patient level of unpredictability is having a toll on them, that all their attention is focused on that individual, and that other family members are suffering as a result, and that there's a lot of like resentment towards the person that's sick. And so we talk about obviously your own self-care and where it's possible to put some kind of non-negotiables in place in terms of looking after yourself. Because if you are pouring from an empty cup, then you certainly cannot support the individual effectively. That's so where it's possible for you to have your own sort of counseling or your own safe space, that's important.
Yeah.
It's also important as a family to be educated around the individual behavior, because very often families will, out of sheer frustration or anger at what's actually presenting, they'll say, well, the individual's doing it to themselves. They're doing it on purpose, or they're being manipulative. So they need to be educated, and they also need to be educated that the individual is not choosing to be mentally ill, and certain things are within the individual's capabilities in terms of keeping themselves well, and other things may. And so you as a family have to be educated on warning signs, so that when the wheels are starting to come off, you can put the necessary measures in place to support yourselves and to support the individual.
Yeah. I think I want to agree there. When somebody is diagnosed with a mental illness, they feel like the entire life has been turned upside down. But actually, the entire family's life has been turned upside down. And I echo what has just been said, that the most important thing, you need to educate yourself about the illness, the diagnosis. And the more educated, I think knowledge is power. The more educated you are, the more you are able to help your loved one, and also not neglecting yourself, not neglecting your needs. What I've seen with family members, as soon as somebody has been diagnosed, the entire world also now, the illness becomes the primary focus, either in the family or in a relationship. It becomes the primary focus, and sometimes as a caregiver, you might neglect or forget to exist out of that situation. So it's very, very important to sort of try and be able to step back sometimes and step out of the situation and breathe, and so that you can be able to offer the support that is required. But if you are also exhausted, if you are misinformed, sometimes you don't know why your family member is, like Liani is saying, you don't know why they behave in a specific manner. Educate yourself about the kind of like I did it personally. Educate yourself about the medication that they're taking. Know what the side effects of those medications are, so that you can understand when your loved one is behaving in a certain manner. And one important thing is having that open communication. It's not easy to achieve, I must say, in the beginning, but it's a process, it's a journey. Take it as in it's a journey that you are going on with your family members. But it can feel very overwhelming. It can feel like a spinner in either a relationship or a family context. So self-care is very important. There's that saying that you have to put the mask on yourself first before you can be able to assist the person next to you.
And I love how both of you spoke on how you can't pour from an empty cup. I think most of the time when we're trying to help, we forget ourselves. But when we forget ourselves, you're not really helping anyone, because you're going to get to a point where you're burnt out, which comes back to, which is going to come to my next question. But also something that you both said that's quite important is education is key. I think when you're not educated, and that's the problem that we have in our society, and that's why these sessions are quite important, is that we are not educated on the mental illnesses that exist. So it actually feeds into the stigma around what is happening. But when you're educated, you can give the person the necessary support without overextending yourself or actually taking out of yourself in order to help them. So that was a very important point for me. But one thing that you were speaking about, Temi, is about getting to a point where you might even burn out. So I wanted to find out, what is caregiver burnout, and how do family members and loved ones make sure that they look after their own mental health? So in as much as we're talking about how to support a loved one, I feel like the people that are supporting them are equally as important. So how do we avoid that? And what is caregiver burnout for someone that is watching and has been doing this for a very long time, taking care of other people? Like, what is it, and how do we avoid it, and how do we best support ourselves before we can support other people?
So I can share maybe some of the signs of caregiver burnout, like something that I said, where you no longer exist out of your loved one's illness. You're constantly very tired. There's something that they call compassion fatigue. You're like really exhausted all the time. You're no longer sleeping well. You start also getting sometimes physically unwell. That is why it's so important to sometimes even you need to take that time to look after yourself. And immediately when you're no longer sleeping properly, those are the signs. You start getting irritable. You start thinking about those thoughts that you're so tired, and then you feel like your loved one is now doing it, they're acting out, or they're doing it on purpose, or you're no longer there, like mentally, because you're so tired. So, it's very important to look after yourself, look out for the signs when you are feeling tired. And I think also ask for help. It's very important. We have organizations like SADC that are really there to assist. And sometimes in our communities, we're very scared to go out to you find that it's something that the immediate family is going through. You can't even ask for help when you need to. If you're caring for somebody, you're scared because you haven't had the conversation yet with the other family members. So I think it's the more we create awareness in our communities, the better. And as a caregiver, I just want you to know that you are not alone. You don't have to go through it alone. It's okay to say I'm tired. It's okay to say I need help.
Yeah.
I think that the other thing to add to that, in everything you've said is so spot on and so true, is that mental illness is not like having, let's say, the flu. Where your nose is running, or your throat is sore, your eyes are watering, and people can actually physically see that you are ill. And so very often it's very hard for family members to take you seriously or to actually believe what you're presenting with. So the individual who's struggling with major depression and who can't get out of bed in the morning and doesn't want to go to work and is neglecting their personal hygiene and is withdrawing from things that used to be pleasurable, it's often believed, they'll say, well, they're just being lazy. They need to pull up their socks and they need to. And you can understand, you know, from a family member's perspective, how frustrating the situation must be and how angry they must be, because this previously lively individual who was the life of the party, who provided so much financially and emotionally for the family, is suddenly completely unavailable. And so, again, it's important that you have support, that you have a space where you can vent these feelings, where it's safe to express this, and at the same time you're also supported and educated in terms of what you are dealing with and in terms of how best to support the individual, because they're not doing it on purpose. And I promise you, they wouldn't choose to spend day after day in bed away from the world if it was up to them.
And what tips would you give them in order to, for the family members that are supporting a loved one with mental illness, what tips would you give them to take care of themselves? Like, we're going to get to the tips that they can use to help support a loved one, but what tips can you give them to take care of themselves? I know we say don't pour from an empty cup, but then it's easier said than done. For example, if it's your child, how do you tell a parent to not pour from an empty cup? You know, how do you, because it can be tough, like it can honestly be tough. So what do you say to that person? What tips can you give them to the point where, yes, it could be your father or it could be your daughter, but what tips do you give to that person who's saying, I feel selfish if I'm not taking care of my daughter who's suffering from a mental illness? Because there's also that guilt that comes with it as well, where we feel like we need to overextend ourselves. And I've from what I've read or even noticed is that especially when it's someone that's super close to you, you tend to blame yourself for how they may feel. So how do you help that person? What tips do you give to that person where you're trying to detach? Honestly, like, detaching is sometimes important, to trying to detach from the situation. Yes, take care of that person, but not forgetting yourself.
And I think that, you know, the self-blame bring up, I think, is incredibly destructive, because what happens is you overcompensating and sort of putting more and more and more to try and like deal with your own guilt. And so I think that said it perfectly. You need to ask for help and support from other family members, friends, community members. You know, very often with someone with mental health, there's a huge fear that they are a risk to themselves or even a risk to others. And so you become the nursing team. You know, you are watching that person 24/7. And that in itself can deplete you, you know, completely. And so if the person's on suicide watch, for example, enlist the help of other people. You know, write a battle plan in terms of what they need to do. Give yourself to go out, go and have a walk, go and do something that's sort of more kind of normal, whether it's having a cup of coffee or meeting someone to just like vent. You know, make sure that you yourself are getting enough sleep. We know that, you know, sleep deprivation and depression are very, very much like linked. And very often, you know, compassion fatigue and caregiver burnout and depression, they begin to mirror each other. And so you don't know where one actually starts and the other one begins. You know, enlist the help of community members, whether it's from like doing your grocery shopping to like making meals, so that you can both focus on yourself and your child or a parent that may be suffering. And also, if you yourself, like if you start to actually see that your mood is dropping, that you can't concentrate, that you are like that you're forgetful, that you are super anxious every time your phone rings because you don't know what news you're going to be presented with, like about that individual, seek help. So whether you go and see a GP, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a counselor, a social worker, get support for yourself. And it's not about that both of you can't afford to be sick. It's that you can't afford to forget about yourself in this process.
Yeah, I actually take it like from a practical level, have a self-care routine. you know, have like every day at 5 o'clock, I go for a walk. Whether if you like meditation, don't skip those things, because sometimes you skip it one day, second day, the next thing you back to the spiral of getting burnt out and being tired. So for me, in my support group, we speak a lot about self-care, and we speak a lot about routine. Have your self-care routine. In the morning, this is what I do. And I always speak about in the 24 hours that you're looking after your loved one, or 24 hours a day, give yourself 30 minutes for shudu. Let the 30 minutes, if you can afford it, if it's an hour, if you can afford it, give yourself an hour. It belongs to you. It's for you to do with that time where you really like taking care of yourself. You can divide it however you want to say. 10 minutes, I'm gonna go running, I'm gonna read my favorite book, or I'm gonna journal, or I'm gonna do whatever that, or put on a face mask if you are a lady, or whatever it is, but give yourself that 1 hour. And if you are living with somebody with like constantly 24 hours, I think like what Leanne is saying, when you reach out to family members out there or the community, I think sometimes it's okay to take one day off, or if you can afford somewhere where you're outside that that environment, where it's either maybe you, if you can afford, go on a hike or do something that is literally, it's a recharge. You're gonna come back a bit energized and ready to face whatever is to come. So have a routine, make it as practical as right, because it's difficult, like you're saying, you know, it's easier said than done. But if immediately when you put it on paper and say, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna wake up, start one day at a time, one step at a time, you will get there. But have your self-care routine. It's very important.
Yeah, it's about focusing on the small victories, even for yourself.
Absolutely,
even if it's taking
absolutely.
a walk for 30 minutes, even if it's just going out, even if it's just cooking your favorite meal for yourself, just doing something for yourself is important, because it's going to feel like a victory. Now, to go back to how to best support a loved one with a mental illness, how can a loved one or family member help someone with their mental health issues? Do you have tips, especially for people that can't really afford, let's say, group therapy, but you're dealing with this, you are living with a person that is suffering from a mental health illness, and you want to know how best to help them? What tips can you give to that person?
So it's vitally important, again, that you make the person feel like you are part of their team. You're not against them. You're there you're there to support them. You are there to offer, you know, what they need in terms of whether it's to take them to appointments, whether it's to be aware of their warning signs, whether it's to make sure that they are sticking to their routine when the wheels start falling off. So they're getting up, they're having a bath, they're eating their meals a day. Also, that you ask permission to join appointments, to ask those courageous questions about what's going on. What can you expect? What kind of treatment are they on? How would you know if the individual is not being treatment compliant? And then also set up some kind of contract with the individual that says when they are in a space where they do not have the ability to make decisions, what kind of decisions can you and can't you make on their behalf? And sometimes those decisions are a bit like require hospitalization. And if the individual is not in a space where they can make those decisions, or for example, they're presenting as a risk to themselves or even others, you know, very often the individual has to be made an involuntary patient. And that is very often a heartbreaking process for a family, because they feel like they are inflicting harm on the individual, but simultaneously they know that if they don't intervene on that level, that the individual themselves could be like at huge risk. And the worst thing for a family is to lose someone to mental health difficulties, because they are left with the questions around, why didn't I do more? What more could I have done? You know, am I to blame for what's actually happened?
Yeah, and to add on what Leanne, I think from personal experience, I like what you're saying, to say if you can, do join your loved one when they go and see their psychiatrist or the doctor. I mean, they are so willing to educate, to give you information. It sometimes sort of assists the loved one as well, because sometimes they even forget about how they react to medication, how they behave, and things like that. I found that to be very, very helpful to do that. So I really want to encourage people to do that. It really works wonders, because you are part of their team with as a family members, with the doctors and everyone, and you're all working towards assisting your loved one.
But something that Leanne spoke about earlier was you touched a bit on consent.
Yeah.
We touched a bit on consent because we're talking about someone getting involved in the treatment plan and everything else. But for example, how do you get involved in the treatment plan of the person, of a loved one? But what if there's the other side way? What if that person is not willing to get help? How do you get consent from that person who doesn't want to wake up in the morning, who just wants to stay in bed, and even when they go to their psychologist or psychiatrist, they're just trying to keep to themselves, because it may sometimes feel like a lonely journey. You feel like you have to deal with it yourself. It's your problem. And then someone's saying, I want to be involved. How do you get consent for that? And how do you get involved without seeming as if you're just being nosy, or you're trying to just find out, or just trying to impose on them? Because at the same time, you don't want to feel as if there's something wrong with you. I feel like that's the biggest thing. You don't want to feel like there's something wrong. Now there's someone constantly checking in on you, someone trying to find out, what are you doing at the doctor's? What are you doing? Because most people try to walk the journey alone. So how do you get involved, especially when someone is not trying to have any of that? But even if they are, how do you ask for consent in such a way that does not make them feel like, okay, this person is just trying to cramp my style?
So look, I mean, if the person has decision-making capacity, if they are of sound mind, and it is their choice to go this journey alone, no other practitioner can engage with you unless they have the individual's consent, because that would be going against the Mental Health Care Act and completely unconstitutional.
Absolutely.
However, if you see that the individual functioning is deteriorating on a daily basis, so like the person you spoke of, who's not getting out of bed, who's not leaving the house, who's withdrawn, is it possible to get a social worker involved, for example, who may be able to do a home visit and engage with the individual in a very non-threatening manner? So you yourself are not even in the room. But again, the person has to agree to that. It's very, very hard, and it's very frustrating. And sometimes we advise the family members, let the person know that you are there for them when they are ready.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's your need to be involved. It's your need to fix the situation because you are feeling understandably helpless. But it's not necessarily what the patient needs. And so very often, by simply making the space for the person without bombarding them, they may realize that they actually need your help and your intervention.
Okay.
Obviously, again, it's all based on an assessment of the individual's capacity, and sometimes you may need a doctor to make that assessment.
True.
And I'm glad you spoke, because someone was even saying that sometimes you find people constantly messaging you, they make you feel like there's something wrong with you, So I'm glad that we touched on this, because you also just want to feel like you're actually making progress. But then once you tell someone that I'm struggling with 1, 2, 3, or someone, I don't know, you spoke about Suicide Watch earlier, you find that even when all of that has passed, I've seen or even heard how they'll still constantly check in on you and make you feel like you're not making any progress. So I'm just glad that you touched on consent, because in as much as a person can be suffering from a mental illness, it doesn't mean that they are completely incapable of making decisions for themselves. But in some cases, someone has to intervene. So I'm glad we touched on that. And I just wanted to ask Thembi, there's still a lot of stigma in different communities and cultures about mental health, right? So what do you do if the stigma or the misunderstanding is within your own family? So now you're trying to get help from a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but then your family saying no, it's probably something else. Because especially in Black communities, you find that they're always associated to something else, such as black magic or something cultural, and you are now seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist that's telling you that no, friend, you are struggling with a mental illness. So what do you do with the misunderstanding? You're not getting support from your family because they believe that no, this westernized version of the help that you're trying to get is actually very separate from the help that you actually need. You just need to see someone who's not a psychologist or psychiatrist. So how do we break the stigma in order for people to get the help that they need, or even the support that they need, so they don't feel like they're alone?
Sure, that's a very tough one, especially in our communities, right? It's I mean, I have a lived experience where I had a family member who I only found out at a very later stage that they had a mental illness, and they just sort of seemed like an outcast, misunderstood. And only later, when I started studying psychology, I realized, I mean, I was a child, but I started putting 2 and 2 together and realized, actually, this is what has been happening. And we have to educate our families. It's not easy, especially with the older generation, and especially if a family has specific beliefs. Even now it does happen. We'll pray for you and the illness will go away, or we'll take you to this place and it will go away. I think if you are in that situation, it's more of targeting individual people and sitting with them and talking with them. There's no straight through answer that would solve that stigma within the family. But I think if with every opportunity, what I do personally, I do take a chance. If I see a loophole where this is an educational moment at their level, using the type of language that they speak, it also helps. Because if you come there with your psychology and your bombastic words, it also doesn't work. So you always, I'm sorry, you know, you have to sort of try and engage them at their level and just constantly do it. Don't give up. With my family, it has changed. There's more understanding. There's more awareness, because I am like that person who would say, Ma, come, let's sit down and talk about this. I think this is what is happening. And my mom is, I have parents that are quite old, but to sit with them and explain them this, I've realized that sometimes we try and do it with a bottom-down approach, but with a top-down approach, try a bottom-up approach at their level, the way they understand it. You know, it's not easy, but it is attainable. It is achievable. It's the language that we use, how we communicate with our loved ones. And if you are diagnosed with a mental illness, I think also sometimes, like, you are an individual who's willing who can make their own decision. I think you need to also do that for yourself, because I've seen that sometimes people don't want to go get treatment, or they rather not go and get treatment because of the stigma that is within the family. Not my child. What is my sister gonna say? I have this child now that, you know. So it's that's why I'm so passionate about any work that involves educating our community, creating awareness. So there's I don't have a straightforward answer for you, but one individual at a time, one family, every opportunity that we get, we need to create awareness. We need to educate our families and our community. From a practical perspective, I've seen individuals who would invite the family member to the support group. And, you know, the first meeting, you can see that they're thinking, what is happening? This is not for me. A person can be quiet for the entire session. It's okay. But sometimes someone within the support group will say something that will bring about that light bulb moment in your family member, and you see them coming again. So you can invite them to a support group. If there's seminars, invite them, and on the radio, wherever you know that there's gonna be a topic about mental illness, just invite them. I think the stigma is all about, in our community, is most of the time, what will people say? Sorry.
I was saying that you touched on something very important earlier. Actually, you touched on so many great points. The fact that we need to explain things in terms that they understand. Because we come with these big bombastic words to people that have been raised in a different way that we have. We are very lucky to have access to information. We are very lucky to have education that caters, and most of the time that also caters to educate us on mental health and mental illnesses. I mean, I was educated about mental illness on social media, but then you find that you're saying the older generation does not have access to that. So even when you're trying to explain, I think also kindness towards, let's say you've been diagnosed as a person that is suffering from mental illness, and you're trying to explain it to your family, also the kindness to know that they may not understand what you're saying, but if you break it down